Okay, so for part 2, we're going to differentiate between a create and an update. And we also think of this as a submit and an edit, right? We use create and update because those are related to our CRUD acronym that we've been working on. But just know that based on where we're at, this is really what we're going to focus on, which is the submit and then modifying the submit to handle an update. But before that, I got to fix the issue I had last time. And, this is where it's really good to troubleshoot. And when I did, I realized I accidentally had input here. Okay. So I had to fix that because in this case, I'm setting the is apartment checked to the value of the object that is just is apartment. So I'm going to check that right now. I'm going to go to my form here as a good time to review where we're at. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put in 2 or 3 so I know. I'll put in is apartment. I'll calculate. I get my results display. I get my form submission, which is awesome. And so now if I have it right, when I hit edit, and something I want you to notice before I go up and look here is that the table, the TR here, does change colors, but I would say it's very subtle and it's hard for the user to know you're in the edit, so we're going to fix that along with something else. But in this case, if we scroll up, we see the apartment and the number was updated, which is awesome. Now we also know that we've only coded the part of the update, the edit, that repopulates the form. And so at this point, when we hit submit or update, because it really is the same function call, that when we do that, right, it's going to basically create a new entry. So just keep that in mind as we're moving through this one, that is what's going to happen. Okay, so let's go through this now again, right? So if let's say I change this to, like I'm simulating the idea of I'm editing something, it's no longer here, it's here because of the way my code is currently in its current state. When I hit update, then I'm going to get 2 entries. And the other thing I get is once I update, shouldn't I get the calculate? Because now I've done a form. Well, actually, no, I haven't. So this would be a good time to talk about this right now. And this is also a good time to talk about up in our form that we have that nice little, and let's drop this down to see it, right? That we barely touched on last time by setting its value for our edit, but now we're actually going to use this to make a determination if we're in an edit mode or a submit mode. But let's fix this before we get there. Okay, so on a submit, let's go ahead and look in our app.js on the submit here. I'm kind of surprised I don't have it, and maybe I erased it to all the work that I've done, but you have it. But if not, let's go add it here. Okay, so once the user hits submit, I would want to call, right, now in this case you might go, okay, which one should you call? Because you actually have one in here, handle clear, and this is the actual button. And in this case, we're not necessarily talking about that button, but because they are both, we want to call this clear form method, right? Yeah, let's go up here and actually do that. Okay, let's actually call the form handler dot clear form. Okay, now when we do that, we need to look over here and realize that we're actually not changing that content on that submit button. And so let's do that now because that's something we can do here. And we haven't had a need to do it yet. So now's a good time to look at it, and we'll say set that text content to calculate footprint. Okay. All right. So now that's a great thing to have to at least give us a visual of that. So let's see. So now we have 2 entries, right? If we do hit edit, we see that being populated. We'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, we now can update this to 5. Leave that as apartment. Click update. And so now we get calculate. Of course, we're still getting the functionality of adding a new one. But now let's turn our attention to here, which is the idea that once we submit, right, or update, we want to actually clear this value as well, because we're going to use what is set on here to determine if we're in an edit mode or not. Okay, so we're actually making decisions in our code today based on a particular condition. So this is a good time because in our development of our projects, we're really there, and so it's a great time to talk about this. So the other thing I'm going to do on form submission is actually set this to, and let's go ahead and do that. Let's set that edit entry, edit ID input dot value on a clear forms, right? We're calling it here. And this would also then happen if we're just clicking the form as well. Okay, so that really helps to set us up for writing some code. But before we actually get to writing some code and talking about it, there's one more thing from a UI perspective that I think is really good, which is down here in our edit. Okay, so down here in our edit, imagine that you are the user, and like I showed you before, when you hit the edit button, you get the TR, the row changing colors, but you really don't get any other way of knowing what's happening. So here we can call window dot scroll to, which is actually going to scroll the window, and it's a method. Okay, remember window is almost synonymous with document. Not entirely, but it is thought of the same way, so it'll scroll that whole window up. And so now we can pass it an object, literal, right? So where we actually set, and what we're doing here is we're customizing its behavior. And we're going to give it, hey, top key, which is its key, is 0, comma, because it's our next key value pair, behavior, comma, smooth. Okay, so now once we've done those things, and we come back over here, okay, and we hit our edit, now we actually get taken to the top of the form to be more user friendly, to say, okay, here's what we need to modify. Okay, and once we hit update, we're going to get a new entry. So now we'll have a new entry right here, this one. Okay, so again, so now let's actually turn our attention. Now that we've done that, let's turn our attention to, and by the way, here we've actually changed that ID. Its value is now, and there's nothing in there. So when we code for, writing code for determining if we're in an edit mode, this would be a value of null because we set that here. Okay, we actually could say actually null, but this also does a similar thing. Okay, so now let's talk about scroll up to our submit. Okay, on our submit, how could we make, write code that would help us decide if we're in edit, help us make that decision. If we're in edit mode, do this. Okay, so there's a couple of things we'd want to think about, and some of it's just naming. It's like, because right now we have new entry, right? So maybe what we want to do first is actually change this, because this handle form submit is going to handle both the calculate and the update. So it's no longer always going to be new. Let's just say entry to save. Okay? So when we're doing this now, right, we can now start writing some logic. or thinking about, can we write some logic to make some decisions, right? And so in this case, what could we test for to see, are we in edit mode? And let's think about this value that we set, right? So if this value is set to the unique ID on a repopulate, then we would know. But we could only test for that if we have it in the object, because using the code as it is here, when it goes out to get the form, it's not grabbing that value. So let's actually include that in our get form inputs. Remember, it's running right here, and so we will now have a locally scoped value for it. Okay, so let's actually do that. Let's actually say, now in here, right, ID equal, okay, the entry ID dot value. Now it won't always we won't always want it to be value, because sometimes we want it to be set as null, right? And then in this case, if this is true, okay, or, and we've used this pattern before, or we'll set it as null. So now we're saying, okay, attempt to set this, right, this key to this value. And if we can't do that, or set it to null. So in other words, this will help us now make our decision in our code, because our form data will now include this. Okay, so as just a simple way to start writing this code, we could say if form data.id, right, if it exists, because if it's null, it won't exist and it'll run the false part of a block, right? Okay, so in this case, if it's true, right, it'll run this if it exists. So this would be in our edit mode. Okay, so let's actually pull some content that I have provided here. So it says if, okay, so right here, we could put it above here. So if the ID is present, it's an update, right? Preserve the original timestamp from the existing entry. Okay, so here we have to start thinking about, because we've built this entry to save that has all of these values from form and from calculated results, but we also set two values here. But in our case, we're going to say, you know what? We're going to take the original timestamp. Okay, we want that one. And we don't need to set the ID because we already have an ID. So in this case, for now, we're just going to comment these things out, and then based on the condition that we're writing for, we will then handle that. We'll handle that in here. So if we do have a form ID, okay, now if I was to start testing my code right now, because I've taken these off, it would break it. So let's write enough code that's going to show us this. But so I just want you to know, because I would normally probably want to go and test as soon as I write code like this, but it's going to create more issues than it's worth, honestly. So if I have an ID, I want to make sure it's a valid ID. So what I'd want to do is I'd want to set a variable that would be the result of something we've already done before, which is we've called a method called findIndex on our in-memory array of objects. This has got a callback function. For each of those objects, we'll call it entry. I could have called this anything I want. Remember back when we did this, we had to have a test that says, when do we know, right, we found an index? We have to have a test. So we'd say return when you find the entry dot ID from iterating over, okay, when it's strictly equal to form data.id. Okay, so when that exists, when this is true, then you're going to return that index to me. And remember, if I don't find it, right? If I don't find it, then I have to do something different. Okay? And what's the condition? If it's and we'll actually, let's write the if it's true, right? If I, in other words, did I find something? So I would say if index not equal, not strictly equal to -1, because remember, if it was -1, it didn't find it. And there could be a variety of reasons it may not find it. So we have to handle, we'll first handle the case that we did find it. Okay, so what do we want to do here? What do we want to do here is we actually want to take that entry, because we're like, okay, we're in the update mode. We have looked in the in-memory carbon footprint. We have an index, okay, based on that form ID. So now we want to say, okay, that object literal, now we want to set its timestamp, and we're not setting it so much here as we're actually just referencing what we already had, because we want to maintain that carbon footprint entry timestamp that we already had. So in this case, we can just say, hey, look at that index. In other words, look to that index and then set reference the timestamp. And that's what now, like where we've done it up here, where we've set it, we're not going to set it new. We're going to actually just pull it off of what we already have, because we're not doing a new one. We're doing what? We're doing an edit, okay? Because we're not destroying the entry, okay? We're just going to replace it. Now we're going to actually call carbon footprint entries now, and then we can also now just say on that index, which is that object, just set it equal to what we're getting ready to save. Okay? All right, so let's think about this just so we kind of know, okay, here's where we're at. So is there an else here? Remember, this else is if I don't find anything in the form ID. Okay, this would be, yeah, I'm doing a create here, right? I'm doing just what I normally would have done here. And we'll move some of that code around in a minute. But in this case, there still is an else here. Now, we could say, I'm not going to handle that, because I'm going to assume if it doesn't come back, I'm not going to do anything. But it's not the best assumption, because there could be a variety of things that may cause this to happen. So in this case, right, we're going to say, you know what? Let's give you a console warning. So it's a step above just the log, right? And we're going to say attempted to update entry with this ID, and let's give it the ID so we know which one it was, just in case we're in here troubleshooting, trying to figure out what happened, right? So from the form ID, we attempted to do that, but in this case, but it was not found. So we're adding as new. Okay. Let's see if I got it all in here. Oh yeah, I forgot to end my template string. Okay. Okay, so now here's the situation we're in. So now what do we do? So in this case, adding is new, which we're going to end up duplicating some of the code in these two blocks, because this one is, adding is new. But this also has to be modified, because we're no longer building these on the original object literal. Okay, but let's do it here, and then you'll see it again. So let's say entry to save dot ID, because we know how to generate an ID. For some reason, when we looked for it before, we couldn't find it. So let's generate storage dot generate unique ID. Good, we have a unique ID. Now the other thing we need is actually we need a timestamp in this case, because remember, right? We can't, for some reason, we can't use that one that we were looking for. So now we say entry to save, and we say timestamp equal, and look at this, we already had the code to do this step. So we come up here and we're like, yep, set those things as well. Okay, and we call this, and I think I have, let me see if I have this in the, yeah, this is your fallback. Okay, and you might, again, you're going to see the code here, down here, because this is, I'm doing a create. And it's going to have some of the same stuff, but not all of it. Okay, so now here, let's say else, right? Right, this is our, actually I don't have it, so you'll get to type it. I forgot to put it in my thing, right? So down here, right, we'll say this is our create operation because it was null. This is a new entry. Now we get to do something similar. We get to set these two things. Okay, so let's come down here and set these two things, which we knew we needed to do because we commented them out above here, right? So now we have both of these set. Cool, right? So we have both of these set. So now we, and by the way, up here, because the thing is this branch, right, will only run if there's not. So we do have to do one more step up here, which is this step right here. Okay, so, and this is where you have to think about, okay, when do I want to push this? So actually let's copy this and do it here, because we do want to push that into our, because this is just like doing it new, right? And so now down here, right, if we're doing, this is our create entry, let's also do it here so we can take it off here, because it's kind of like, okay, we don't have to push it, but now no matter which of these have fallen through, okay, let me just think about, and there could be, let's think about this, right? So we need to push up here if we've found, right? We don't need to do a push, meaning, remember what a push is. And actually that's actually that's the old syntax, so I actually do have to change that as well, which is entry to save. Okay, and in this case it's also up here. Cool, I'm glad I caught that before I got the error, but it'll be okay to get the error. Okay. Okay, so let's do a test. There may be something, a little bit of fallout. We'll find out if there was something that didn't. But what'll be good is we'll get to see our logic. I'm going to clear all my data because I don't want to have anything in here. Okay, I'm going to run a calculation. I'm going to get this entry. I'm going to go, okay, good. Over here, I got my form. Right? I could go look at here. I should have nothing in here, right? Because I'm not on an edit yet. So now let's actually go and set a breakpoint though, right here. Okay. So now let's hit an edit. Now we know what an edit does. Cool. Right? So now we're going to do an update. So now we're going to test our logic. So we're going to hit update. We're just going to, and actually I could have done it after. And this is good to know, is how to jump over. It's like, okay, just do that. All right, so now look in here, right? There's our form data that now includes that ID. That's awesome, but it doesn't include the other two items. So now we have our entry, okay? So our entry has in it, good, 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 good. Okay. Okay, good. So now, if this exists, right? If it exists, we know we're in an edit mode, which we are. So now we're going to find, right? We're going to look for this one. And we're going to find its index, and it's the only one that existed. So we could do this again just to make sure this is working correctly. We do find an index of 0, which means the first one. So now in this case, we're going to run this block because we found it, right? And notice how we don't have a timestamp, right, on this one, because this was rebuilt based on our form data and our calculated results. So now what we want to do is put that timestamp on there. Okay, good. Now that was the timestamp from before. And I can actually tell that based on the time that is up here. Okay, so now I know I've saved that, and so now I can run my storage. Cool, data saved, and we could go look at application and see. I should have pulled this up before, but we can do it again. I have the timestamp. Yep, I got it. So now I have the original object. Now, I didn't actually update data, so we could do that next. But now we're just seeing, hey, did we have any errors in our code? So we'll go ahead and let this run. Good. Cool. And look what happened was we didn't get a duplicated entry. Right? No duplicated entry because it updated the entry we had. So let's actually do another. Okay, I'm actually just going to let this one run. I'm going to do another with some data in it so we can see that as well. Do some good test here, right? Good testing. We'll calculate that one. We'll let that one run as well. Okay, so those should have been two, right? New entries. Cool. I should have put some, but it's okay. Some square footage. I actually did on this one. That's good, right? And now we can say, okay, we know we're not in edit mode. So now let's see if we actually can edit. Let's say this one, hit edit. Oh, that's awesome. Let's give it a apartment. And let's give it this. Okay. Good. And let's update the entry. Actually, let's just let it run and look at our numbers. Cool. Cool. All right, that worked. That's awesome. Okay. So it's, let me see. I know we got, let me see if I have something else in here. Right. If data is null, assign a new one. And in this case, it was right here, right on the new one, on the timestamp. Okay. So this logic is really, take some time to look at this because this will help you prep for when we get to the actual decision, your decision making app, because you're making a decision here. We're making a decision based on conditions that we've set up, right? That we can account for, right? The condition of, just as a review, and this is a good time to review this. So right now, because we just updated an entry, we cleared that. But if I update, let's say I update this entry, right? I say, okay, we have 4 people here. Let's say here, and just so we can see some differences, right? We're going to update now, right? So now we know we have that value. So now on our code, when we hit update, we know that our app submit form can now account for this, right? I'm going to jump over that one. By the way, always learning these different ones, I hope I've already covered this in attendance to give you that experience. I'm setting up a new, and this is a good part to understand, we're setting up a new object literal on this step, okay? This is a new one, right? But what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, if that existed, right, which we know it did, then let's find the index of the one that was provided through the form data, right? So let's actually go find it. That index, was it 0? Yeah, I always forget. We sort these. So this was 0 at the end. Always throws me off a little bit. I forget that we do a sort. So this is the oldest one, which would be the one is in there. Okay. So now we set the timestamp to what it already was, what we already had in there, okay, which is awesome. And actually we could have actually been more deliberate here about looking at what that was, okay. So now let's keep stepping, set that local and hit run. and then we are good to go. Matter of fact, let's do one more test. This test, let's actually look at all three. So we have, right, we have three, and remember these are sorted, right? So in this case, right, the vegan one with the, let's look at it, just because this can get just a little bit confusing, is now here, this last one, right, with 0 square footage with vegan is actually the 0. So if we did this one, right, so let's actually do the one that is here. So 27, if this works, when we hit edit and we come up here, right, let's do 27, okay, was one member, so let's do 3. Okay, we'll leave it, we'll take off apartment. Okay, we'll give it some square footage, right? So this 27, I'm just going to look at the last number. Let's update the entry. Let's let it run. Okay, and then what should happen is that one in the middle, the 27, good, good. So we can see that it worked. And so I've intentionally spent some time here to really flush out this idea of why we're writing the code this way. By writing the code this way, we have this one function that is being called, right? The submit form handler for both our create and our edit because of the logic that we've written. I hope that helps you out. And in this case, right, I think this is going to be the last one for this part 2. And really, we've reached a milestone along our development path here. And here's some common things I want you to think about. Here's common ways to use scroll, and then help me practice decision-making writing decision-making conditional code. Right? Because this idea, it's not necessarily, it won't be obvious because you're writing decision logic that humans make decisions all the time, but we don't think about it in terms of code. So anyway, hope this helps, and then we'll move on to the next one.